Welcome back to the Brahmin Word, and we are going to take a look at Saul's perspective of the passage of David and Goliath. We are not going to look at the whole entire chapter. We're just going to look at the verses that pertain to Saul himself. But it is kind of interesting to get his perspective on it. So turn with me to 1 Samuel chapter 17. We're going to go throughout the chapter, just not the whole entire chapter. So let's start with verse 1. Now the Philistines gathered their armies for battle, and they were gathered at Soko, which belongs to Judah, and encamped between Soko and Azekah in Ephes-dammim. And Saul and the men of Israel were gathered and encamped in the valley of Elah, and drew up in line of battle against the Philistines. And the Philistines stood on the mountain on the one side, and Israel stood on the mountain on the other side, with a valley between them. So you have this setup with Israel on the one side, the Philistines on the other, and Saul, being the king, is supposed to be the leader. He's supposed to be the one that goes out and leads Israel into battle. And then all of a sudden, you have Goliath come out, this massive, massive human being, this giant, and he basically he makes a challenge. So let's go down to verse 8. He stood and shouted to the ranks of Israel, "Why have you come out to draw up for battle? Am I not a Philistine, and are you not servants of Saul? Choose a man for yourselves and let him come down to me. If he is able to fight with me and kill me, then we will be your servants. But if I prevail against him and kill him, then you shall be our servants and serve us." And the Philistine Goliath said, "I defy the ranks of Israel this day. Give me a man that we may fight together." When Saul and all Israel heard these words of the Philistine, they were dismayed and greatly afraid. So, couple things here that the perspective of Saul. As the king, and I think why Goliath mentions Saul by name in verse 8, "Are you not servants of Saul?" He is assuming that Saul should be the champion, especially because as we have gone through this, remember, Saul is one of, if not the tallest Israelite in the country. And so you would think that he would pose this great figure, this great individual to fight on behalf of Israel. And he's the king too. But by Goliath calling him out, if Saul does not become the champion immediately, then it basically pushes Saul into this corner of, you are not being man enough to face me. And well, Saul gives into that. Not only does Israel, are they very, very scared of the challenge to one person from Israel to face off against Goliath, with some pretty dangerous ramifications of that fight too. So not only do you have fear from that, but you also have fear from the fact that that Goliath has really defied Israel and will later on defy the God of Israel as well. So it's really just this point of mislead, like just a lack of leadership on Saul's part, giving in to fear with Goliath not being the champion that faces off against Goliath, not just because he's the king, but because it has the stature to take to go into battle as well, even though, of course, Goliath was a huge, huge human being. But that is where David, the son of Jesse, comes into play. And he comes to the battle to help his brothers, hears about all of this going on, and he even hears the challenge that Goliath makes, and he's trying to figure out what is going on. He hears about the vast riches, or the vast reward that King Saul is offering whoever does it, which again is just this massive red flag of leadership. If you as a leader have to bribe people under your leadership to do something that you should do personally, that should go, something's wrong. And this is definitely the case here. And finally, David finally says, this is crazy. We need somebody to go out and to do battle against this Goliath, because he is defying Israel, but he's also defying the God of Israel. And, well, somebody listens to the words of David and he brings it to the king. So, verse 31, go down to verse 31 of chapter 17. When the words that David spoke were heard, they repeated them before Saul, and he sent for him. And David said to Saul, "Let no man's heart fail because of him. Your servant will go and fight with this Philistine." And again, remember, David is very, very young age at this point. And Saul said to David, "You are not able to go against this Philistine to fight with him, for you are but a youth, and he has been a man of war from his youth." Now, let's go back to where we were just at last time. We saw the blessing that David brings to Saul. And then it mentions that he even points him as his armor bearer. Now, we'll discuss this in a little bit as well at the end of this passage in chapter 17. But the end of chapter 16 has always made some folks go, what's going on here? Most likely, with this being written as one actual whole book, First and Samuel and Second Samuel, which would have probably been written as one very big long manuscript instead of First Samuel and Second Samuel. It would just be called Samuel, or the Book of Samuel. But for down the line, it made more sense to split it up with First and Second Samuel. Anyways, with that being said, there are some chronology where you will get a little bit of a foreshadow. So when chapter 16, the end of chapter 16, mentions that David became the armor bearer to Saul, I believe that that happens after chapter 17. Now, why couldn't you have just put it after chapter 17? I think it's to show at the end of chapter 16 how important David is going to be, not just for Israel, but for Saul personally. So, yes, Saul has met David already, with him being a young man that comes to play the harp, but he hasn't seen him as a warrior at this point. And so I think after chapter 17, that's when he sees him as a warrior. And then after that is when he appoints him as armor bearer. So I think that is why you see a foreshadowing at the end of chapter 16, even though most likely David was appointed armor bearer after the events of chapter 17. But with that being said, you have you have this moment where Saul says, "Look, no, it doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make any sense that you should go and fight." But David sticks up for himself. Verse 34. But David said to Saul, "Your servant used to keep sheep for his father, and when there came a lion or a bear and took a lamb from the flock, I went after him and struck him and delivered it out of his mouth. And he arose against me. I caught him, and if he arose against me, I caught him by his beard and struck him and killed him. Your servant has struck down both lions and bears, and this uncircumcised Philistine shall be like one of them, for he has defied the armies of the living God." And David said, "The Lord who delivered me from the paw of the lion and from the paw of the bear will deliver me from the hand of this Philistine." And Saul said to David, "Go, and the Lord be with you." I've always wondered, with the end of verse 37 there, what made Saul go, okay, you go and let the Lord be with you. It's a young man, somebody who doesn't have military experience, and yet he lets him go and fight one of the greatest battles of all time. And it's a very gutsy move, but for me, I sadly probably would say that it's not because Saul has faith, but most likely it's just he doesn't really have anybody else to go. And he personally doesn't want to go. And so he is just like, you know what? Great, fine, you go and let the Lord be with you. I don't think we're supposed to take this as Saul has this great moment of faith in the Lord at this moment. He is just kind of just saying, you know what? Nobody else has come forward, clearly. Nobody else has come forward. And you know what? Let's just see what happens. But he does want to try to put his stamp on this battle. So, verse 38. Then Saul clothed David with his armor. He put a helmet of bronze on his head and clothed him with a coat of mail. And David strapped his sword over his armor. And he tried in vain to go, for he had not tested them. Then David said to Saul, I cannot go with these, for I have not tested them. So David put them off. Then he took his staff in his hand and chose 5 smooth stones from the brook and put them in his shepherd's pouch. His sling was in his hand, and he approached the Philistine. So, yes, David does not go into battle with the armor because he has not tested it, which is a very solid and wise move militarily. From a military standpoint, it's a very wise move. My guess, too, it probably just didn't fit very well. You have Saul being one of the tallest people in the country of Israel. Most likely, David is not up to that task, just from a stature standpoint. Yeah, he may be close, but he's definitely not on the same level, especially being a man of youth. And so, most likely, it probably just didn't fit very well either. But I think here, though, why would Saul try to put his armor on David when he could have just worn his own armor into battle? I think it's a little bit of pride and maybe some back of the mind jealousy. It's like, okay, I don't want to go. I don't want to fight. And this youth wants to fight. But I still want to have a big say in it, so I'm going to make him look like me ish, look like me ish with my armor on, and so then people will say, "Oh, David killed Goliath with the armor of Saul on." So I think that is kind of what Saul is thinking. But David, again, not just makes a choice that is for sure wise on his end. But then it's also showing that he is putting faith into this upcoming battle. That's what he's putting to the forefront, not military expertise, but faith. And I think that is a something really, really cool to see. But with that, you probably know what happens next. David kills Goliath, and then the Israelites then really rout the Philistines, who, of course, didn't think that they would lose, and so they weren't too keen on being servants, and so they instead fell by the sword. But after all of this, Saul wants one last meeting with David after this great victory, not just for Israel, but for David specifically. And that's verse 55. As soon as Saul saw David go out against the Philistine, he said to Abner, the commander of the army, Abner, whose son is this youth? And Abner said, As your soul lives, O king, I do not know. And the king said, Inquire whose son the boy is. And as soon as David returned from the striking down of the Philistine, Abner took him and brought him before Saul with the head of the Philistine in his hand. And Saul said to him, Whose son are you, young man? And David answered, I am the son of your servant, Jesse the Bethlehemite. Now, we go back to kind of the question that we looked at earlier. From my standpoint, it makes a lot of sense why Abner does not recognize David, does not know whose son he is. Abner being the commander of the army, that's why that phrase is most likely there. Which also begs the question, why did Abner fight against Goliath? But anyways, you have Abner not knowing David makes a lot of sense. He might have seen David maybe around the palace, maybe, but that's about it. I understand completely why Abner doesn't know who this young man is. Now, Saul. Yes, Saul knows or has been told who David's father is. But there's two reasons why he asked the question in verse 55, whose son is this youth? First off, it is a term of gratefulness because he wants to tell this young man's father how brave and how courageous and how obviously helpful this young man is. There could be a reward for the father as well. So, from a practical standpoint, that's why that question is asked. The other reason why, too, is just to show that David, again, was not really. Yes, Saul admired David for bringing the harp and helping him in that way, but he didn't see him as a military expert. He did not see him in that light, and it wasn't. It's it's a little bit vague how often that troubling spirit would come upon Saul in chapter 16. So it could be that it may not have happened for a while at that point, or sorry, at the point of chapter 17. And so Saul honestly could have just forgot, which makes a lot of sense. Not just because he's the king of Israel, but because clearly Saul is really starting to go down a very destructive path, not just for himself, but it really hurts those around him. And so, with that being said, thanks for spending a little bit of time with me today as we see David and Goliath with the perspective of King Saul. And next week, though, we are going to take a look at how Saul really just sadly really gives in to jealousy. And so we will take a look at that next week. But thanks for spending a little bit of time with me today. I will see you next week. Thanks.